when our towns were in flame, and yet we got the blame. I wasn't surprised. When police stormed the streets and no one came to our needs, I wasn't surprised. Well, it wasn't our last, and it wasn't our first. My people are killed, even right in our church. And maybe I'm wise from too many cries, but I wasn't surprised.
Good evening and welcome, everyone. I'm Iris Iglarsh, president of the Northwest Suburban chapter of National Organization for Women. And tonight, I'm especially pleased to welcome Nancy Rotering, who is currently in her third term as mayor of Highland Park and recently launched a bid for a seat on the Illinois Supreme Court of the 2nd District. Tonight, Nancy will talk to us about advocacy, a topic dear to her heart that she teaches at Northwestern University. Nancy, who lives in Highland Park, Illinois, graduated from Highland Park High School and earned a bachelor's degree in economics from Stanford University in 1983. She earned an M.B.A. in health services management, marketing, and finance from Northwestern University Kellogg School of Management in 1985, and a JD from University of Chicago Law School in 1990. In 2015, Nancy founded the North Suburban Legal Aid Clinic, which provides free legal services in the areas of immigration, housing, and domestic violence cases. She recently served as a board of directors member for Planned Parenthood.
Stations in
Please mute themselves. She recently served as a board of directors member for Planned Parenthood of Illinois and the Illinois Women's Institute for Leadership Training Academy. So now it's a pleasure for me to introduce the woman of the hour, Nancy Rotering. Nancy?
Thank you, Iris. And I'm just so delighted to be with the National Organization for Women. You were the first political group I ever joined back when I was a new staffer at General Motors in Detroit in the mid-'80s. Needless to say, it was a bit of a place of sexism and misogyny, and I needed power from my people. So I joined NOW, really appreciated all the support that I was able to get from that membership. And it goes without saying, the collective power of women's voices is critical. So thank you for your work, organizing and creating positive change for over 55 years. And thank you, Iris, for your kind invitation to speak with the group tonight. As you mentioned, our topic is advocacy, finding the power in your voice. And before I begin, I'm going to give the caveat, I am not giving legal advice. This is merely a conversation with all of you about the power of your voices. So let's start by discussing why advocacy matters. And Ed, we're going to try to share the screen here, my friend. So let's give this our best shot. I'm going to go over here and shrink myself. There we go. How am I doing so far? There we go.
Perfect.
Just to go. All right.
Perfect.
So let's talk about why advocacy matters. Political scientist Richard Neustadt defined political power as the ability to effectively bargain and persuade to achieve political objectives. And Lori Cox-Hahn, who's a political science professor, describes power as the ability to influence others to get what you want. And politics is who gets what, when, and how. And as we know, although people often think of elected office as the epitome of political leadership, we know that political leadership really comes in many forms. It's not just elected office. And so if you boil it all down, it's about persuasion, it's about policy, it's creating an agenda for meeting the public's needs, it's convincing others to say, do, advance what you deem is important, whether it's as a representative or as an organizer. And it shows itself as speaking out, voting, educating, initiating. And political scientists have found that time and again, society, for some reason, and not that we endorse this, but this is just sort of the fact of the matter, that people are more accepting of women who enter politics from a place of advocacy, experience and exposure as an advocate, taking action as an advocate, and then running for elected office, the world is just more apt to see them as a leader. Whether this is correct or not, I can't say that, but I can just say that's sort of a very typical way that people come to elected offices from a place of advocacy. And so Congresswoman Lucy McBath is an example. And we know that for a variety of reasons, women often are more comfortable starting off as advocates. Perhaps they're mirroring consciously or unconsciously what society is willing to accept from them. And people often will say, I got angry and I took action. I was frustrated and I took action. This is wrong, let's take action. So we've all heard or know advocates who've stood up for an issue, whether it's gun violence prevention, access to reproductive health, domestic abuse survivors, civil rights, immigrants' rights, people with disabilities rights, access to housing, LGBTQ rights, workers' rights, on and on and on. And some have gone on to run for office, but others oftentimes support or educate those who are running for or holding office. And I know that each of you, as I'm saying this, are thinking, what's my one big issue that really matters to me that you'd like to take action on? And if you could, please put it in the chat and just take a minute and share right now one issue that matters to you. I'll go. Mine is access to healthcare. And I can't see if anybody's putting anything into the chat, but we will come back to it. So suffice it to say, in my class, I asked this question at the very beginning. These are the issues that they talk about or have talked about in the past year. And I'll just share those with you as well to see if any of those are of interest. So let's talk about how people get to this place. Harriet Wood wrote an unbelievable memoir about how she became Missouri's first female lieutenant governor. But she actually got started because a manhole cover on the busy street outside of her house was constantly making noise and waking up her 3 young children from their naps. She got fed up, she took action, and then, took it from there and eventually became the first female lieutenant governor of Missouri. My start was pretty much the same. I was advocating for a stop sign at a dangerous intersection that I crossed with my young children walking to and from school every day, and sort of grew from, let's go get a stop sign. Hey, there's like a whole bunch of old guys on this council. This isn't really representative government. I think I'll run. And then we just sort of took it from there. Maybe you've heard of Diane Nash. She is still alive and working in Chicago. She's an incredible civil rights advocate who was launched into her career as an advocate out of injustice at a lunch counter in Nashville. But she went on to work shoulder to shoulder with the great men that we all are aware of from the civil rights movement as a freedom rider, as somebody who helped create the March on Selma. She did the March on Washington. Again, unfortunately, she was a woman, so she doesn't get the credit that the men got. But that came out of her place of, hey, this isn't fair, at a lunch counter in Nashville. So when we talk about political leadership, we know that it comes in many forms. And we talked about elected office, there's appointed office, community organizing, candidate recruitment, training or support, through direct action, through impactful advocacy. And we know that if you want to affect change, advocacy in its many forms is the way to go. So another time I'll come and give you a lecture about why I think you really need to run for office, but today we'll stick with advocacy. And as I mentioned, women often come to advocacy from a place of personal circumstance, recognizing a need for change and realizing that something needs to be done. And returning to a recurrent theme throughout the history of women in American political leadership, as I said, people get angry, they take action. A terrific book is Soraya Chemaly's book, Rage Becomes Her. I'll repeat that, Rage Becomes Her. It provides incredible examples of how women take anger and then turn it into impactful action. So political participation, of course, comes out of that need for action. So if advocacy is getting people to care about your position and to take action, then how do we get people to care? How do we get their buy-in? How do we get them to take action? And we know that there are obstacles to overcome. Oftentimes, bias gets in the way. First efforts might result in a loss. But let's talk about forms of advocacy. A lot of it begins with storytelling. What story best illustrates your issue, your position, your movement. So here's an example. On Black Friday in 2012, Lucy McBath's son, Jordan, was sitting in the back seat of a friend's car at a gas station. A man pulled up next to them, complaining about the loud music they were playing. He then pulled out a gun, fired 10 shots into the car, hitting Jordan 3 times and killing him. After Jordan's death, McBath dedicated her life to preventing other families from experiencing the same pain she did. She left her 30-year career as a flight attendant at Delta Airlines to become the national spokesperson and faith and outreach leader for Everytown for gun safety and Moms Demand Action for gun sense in America. 5 years later, in 2017, after the mass shooting that killed 17 high schoolers at Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, she knew she had to stand up and run for Congress. A heartbreaking but inspiring story. And storytelling is how we draw people close to care. Sharing from a place of personal experience is a quick way to bring people into your concern, your idea, your passion. Although I have to share, one of my huger gripes is that for some reason, we demand that women share intimate stories, intimate details. If you think about it, how often are we told really, really personal stories about abortion experiences or assaults or birth experiences? And we don't usually hear these personally intimate stories from men who are advocating. We just don't. So I'm not going to explain it. I'm certainly not going to excuse it. I just need to register my opposition to it. And I'm going to ask that as we advocate, can we advocate effectively without having to share our most intimate stories? I think it's only fair. All right, back to advocacy. So a few key points. Let me ask you, do you spend time ranting on social media? Do you share posts that aggravate you? Do you send threatening emails to elected officials? And I'll ask you this, how effective has that been? Let's talk about effective methods of advocacy. So first, I'm going to talk to you about nonviolent direct action, which you may be familiar with from Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail. The goal is to start with educating and not from a place of public shaming. Generally, when people email their elected officials with a respectful tone and an effort at helping to get them to understand their concern, they or their staff are usually going to try to respond, try to help. But I've found, and many of you probably have found, if people come out of the gates with a threat or an accusation or a fury on social media, they're far less likely to see a positive outcome for their efforts. And so it goes without saying, nobody likes to be shamed or threatened. And I'll just share that whole piece, that creating attention, is step 5. So let's walk through the 6 steps and we'll take it from there. So step 1, obviously, information gathering. You want to identify the issues in your community or your school or whatever in need of positive change. And to understand the issue or the problem or the injustice, you have to increase your own understanding of the problem. And you need to look at all sides of the issue. So often we come to advocacy as, this is my opinion, this is my pain, this is my whatever. But we need to really take a 360-degree look at what is the issue. It might even involve formal research. It may involve focus groups, talking to others to getting their experiences. Then step 2, educate others. You have to inform others, including your opposition, about your issue. And in order to create change, the people in the community have to be aware of the issue and they have to understand its impact. And educating others will then minimize misunderstanding, hopefully gain support, hopefully gain allies. I like to call this creating a foundation for action. Step 3, there's your own personal commitment to this situation. You have to check and affirm your own faith in the philosophy of this moving forward with nonviolence and peacefully and communicatively trying to work together. Causing change requires dedication and it requires long hours of work. And if you just want to throw something on social media, all right, that might feel good, but it's not going to create the change. So you have to be meeting with others, helping people stay focused on the goal, prepare yourself to accept sacrifices if necessary, and sometimes recognize the compromise is just the beginning of full achievement. Step 4 is negotiations, and using grace and humor and intelligence, you want to confront the people who need to participate in this change. Discuss a plan for addressing and resolving whatever the injustice is, look for what's positive in every action and interaction you have with your opposition. And again, don't seek to humiliate them, but call forth the good in your opponent. And I know in these times, this really sounds almost anachronistic, but let's see if this works. Let's move back to this place of common good. Let's see if we can work together and find opportunities for collaboration and looking for ways for our opponents to be our allies. And can we find places of agreement? Step 5, obviously, direct action. So these are the actions you're taking to convince others to work with you to resolve the injustices. And it's imposing what's called a creative tension into the conflict. It's most effective when it illustrates the injustice that it seeks to correct. And as everybody on this call knows, there are hundreds of types of direct actions. There are boycotts, marches, rallies, letter writing, petition campaigns, political action, voting, public art and performance. All of these are opportunities to kind of create that tension, create that discussion. You've already informed, you've already negotiated, you've already kind of laid out the where's our common place. Now we're going to get everybody's attention. And then hopefully, step 6, reconciliation. So nonviolence obviously seeks friendship and understanding. It doesn't seek to defeat the opponent. It's directed against evil systems and oppressive policies and unjust acts, not against people. And it recognizes that people need to coexist beyond the movement. This is the type of advocacy that recognizes what I always say to my kids: life is long, behave accordingly. Burning bridges, lobbing grenades, pick your metaphor, to achieve actual lasting change, you need to find a way for both sides to win. And as we stated at the outset, advocacy is making your voice heard regarding the issue most closely related to your purpose and mission. And advocating for your mission might include contacting your state and city or federal representatives to explain and share the information about the work that you're doing. Let's talk about what that looks like. Whoops, wrong slide. There we go. So, oh, no, I do want to go back and talk about preemption. So first and foremost, let's make sure that you're talking to the right unit of government. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who are so passionate about an issue, and they show up at City Hall and we have nothing to do with it. And in Highland Park, we don't run the schools, and people are like, let's talk about the schools. And I'll have to say to them, love to hear from you, go First Amendment, but you're talking to people who don't have anything to do with schools. So you don't want to lobby your state rep about a federal issue and vice versa. And so what is preemption? I'm sure all of you could sing of this with me, but preemption occurs when a law at a higher level of government is used to overrule authority at a lower level. State law can be used to preempt local ordinances. Federal laws can be used to preempt state law. And by way of example, in 2013, when my city council and I banned assault weapons, the Illinois General Assembly had given cities a 10-day window in which they could pass a law banning these weapons. And after those 10 days, that window shut, and there was no more option for local municipalities to ban assault weapons. The state law preempted any local ordinance. So we made sure to pass our law before the window closed. But now, every time a city contacts me and asks for a copy of our ordinance and asks for our strategy, and they say they want to use it in their town, I have to give them the caveat that state preemption is prohibiting any new laws banning assault weapons. And even though our ordinance passed constitutional muster in the federal courts, when we were sued by the NRA, they took us all the way to the US Supreme Court. The state of Illinois no longer allows cities to ban assault weapons. So I spent years trying to convince the Illinois General Assembly to get rid of that weird time limit. No luck. But in any case, it's a great example of preemption. So preemption might determine where your issue can be addressed. And as I mentioned, talking to a city council about a federal issue is a waste of everybody's time. And talking to a city council about state issues is a waste of time. So it's important to know that your issue is being brought to the right unit of government. So when you do go to talk to your government, here's some suggestions that I have. And I've kind of pulled these together, talking to folks at different levels of government. I myself worked in State Rep Karen May's office for a while, and obviously now as a mayor, all the time I'm hearing from folks who are interested in contacting at least our city council. So when you do reach out, the recommendation is call, don't write. Staff usually keeps a tally of calls and they report back to their representative. If you do write, because you feel like you have a lot of information you need to share, I'm going to tell you, keep it short and to the point. Don't go on and on and on for pages. And if you want a response, send an email. It's just easier for folks to get back to you. A paper letter gets lost on a busy desk and you're annoyed, and then the person finds it months later and it's probably a mood issue at that point. And as for those forms that groups like Sierra Club and Move On send, click this link and it'll go straight to your rep. Those are usually not responded to either because they know that there wasn't a lot of time and thought put behind that. Nice to know, not likely to get a response, not very impactful. If you can, attend a meeting and speak. That's about as direct as advocacy can get. And as many of you know who have appeared before units of government or the city council or a school board, the agenda is required by law to be posted a defined number of days in advance of the meeting, so you can see if your topic is going to be discussed, and it will provide for business from the public. And that's when you should speak, and you should be prepared. Don't wing it. Know if there's a time limit for speakers, which there likely is, and stick to that time limit. Consider bringing a petition indicating that while others may not have been able to join you, you represent more voices. Email the council, if it's a city council or whatever part of the government that you're hoping to speak to, in advance with relevant context, photos, if appropriate, talking about what you're seeking. Definitely bring supporters. The more the merrier. That has more of an impact. And if it's relevant, bring the press. See if they'll come and maybe cover the issue and the conversation. And be aware of the Open Meetings Act, which details the public's right of notice and your ability to attend and speak at public meetings, and also recognize the power of the Freedom of Information Act. You have the right to request a lot of information from your units of government, which may support or inform your advocacy. And lastly, be aware of the public access counselor and the Attorney General's office, who can support you if your unit of government's not being forthcoming as required by the law. So for state and federal lobbying, you usually will meet with staff for a limited period of time. And again, send information in advance and bring information you can leave with them. Ask to take photos for your later use on social media to amplify your efforts. You can request to testify before a committee, and it helps to have a good relationship with your representatives so that if you want to do that, they know who you are and they're more willing to help you with that process. And at the state level, you can also file witness slips on legislation without having to drive to the Capitol. So another way to advocate is through the creation of a nonprofit. And so we know that political leadership can often come in the form of an agency, a not-for-profit that promotes a cause, answers a question, provides where others may not. And so when we think back to our definition of political leadership, getting the resources to those who will bring about change at the time that it's needed. So for example, if food insecurity is an issue in your community, advocate for change by creating the agency that feeds the hungry. Domestic violence is pervasive in every community. Advocate for survivors by providing safe shelter and access to attorneys who can implement orders of protection from abusers. Access to housing for young adult members of the LGBTQ communities is very difficult. Be their advocate by bringing the housing and the LGBTQ advocates into a collaborative effort. Young offenders with challenging home situations are at risk for reincarceration. Advocate by bringing together wraparound services along with vocational training and providing a path for reentry instead of recidivism. So what if that organization doesn't exist, but it should? You can start it yourself. I started a legal aid clinic, as Iris mentioned at the beginning, focusing on immigration, domestic violence, and housing issues. There are opportunities for your organization to be the change and then create a more comprehensive solution through advocacy. So when we talk about advocacy and a not-for-profit, there are a bunch of ways that you can do it that are related to your organization's purpose or mission. And we talked about contacting state, city, federal representatives to explain your mission, share information about the work you're doing. You can invite representatives or members of the community to visit your site or to engage in informational sessions about your organization. Obviously, creating an email or social media campaign to share information, to promote events, projects, and initiatives. It goes without saying that nonprofit advocacy obviously takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of time, and it's more about education and promotion of services than trying to make a legislative change. And advocacy can be used by all nonprofits, including 501c3 organizations, as long as it's helping to further their goals. And that's regardless of the tax exempt status or designation. But I do think it's important to understand the difference between the various types. And Iris, I'm keeping an eye on the clock. I think we're running kind of long. Are we still good continuing on this path, or do you need me to start wrapping up because of the timing?
I think you're doing fine.
Okay.
Where
You
we
can
are.
tell it's a subject I love, so I'm happy to
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I keep going. I'm interested.
All right. Oh, we'll keep going. So I'm not going to go into great detail tonight about the different types of 501c organizations or how to start a not-for-profit. Happy to come back and have that chat as well. But suffice it to say, the type of nonprofit that you create, whether it's a C3 or a C4, can clearly limit and impact its involvement with advocacy versus lobbying. And I think all of you probably know that 501c designations are for specific types of tax-exempt nonprofit organizations. Registering obviously allows them to be exempt from federal taxes. And all nonprofits know this designation has to be protected through accurate reporting, proper management to stay exempt. And there are several, obviously, under the Internal Revenue Code, but the two that we'll talk about tonight are C3 and C4. So let's discuss the differences between those two. A C3 designation applies to organizations that have religious, charitable, scientific, literary, or educational purposes. It allows donors to potentially deduct contributions from their taxes. And it's important to know that by law, 501c3 designees cannot participate in political campaigning or related activities. And violating that rule can result in a loss of that tax exempt status. There's a small loophole that allows public charities to engage in small lobbying efforts to affect legislation, but the money spent on these activities cannot be a substantial part as defined by the Internal Revenue Service. And usually it means that no more than 20% of the operating budget can go towards lobbying for that entity. So as a 501c3, you can advocate for your organization or your mission, but you cannot get into political lobbying efforts. 501c4s are social welfare organizations. They have their own rules regarding tax exemptions and political lobbying, and contributions to C4s are usually not tax deductible by donors. These organizations can participate in political activities and campaigning as long as the funds they use represent less than half of their total budget. Their contributions cannot be given directly to a candidate, and their primary focus must still be on their foundational social welfare mission, not on lobbying efforts. And it can make a difference whether a C4 lobbies for legislation or a candidate lobbying for legislative change is much less restricted than lobbying for specific candidates. There's a little bit of room for lobbying for candidates, but the money has to go towards funds that are not directly tied to the candidate's campaign. Clear as mud. Okay, so just to be clear, advocating, lobbying, what are we doing? Lobbying supports or opposes a specific piece of legislation or a regulation or a candidate or an official, and staff and volunteers might work to influence legislation or legislators on behalf of the organization, or an organization could ask for public support on a specific issue. For many nonprofits, lobbying educates the donors about specific legislation that can benefit or harm the public, the nonprofit's mission, or its constituents. And for a nonprofit, the line between lobbying and advocacy can be hard to navigate. So as a rule of thumb, try to avoid it if you can. Too much lobbying can strip an organization of its exempt status and even result in a fine. And while lobbying efforts can be a productive and essential part of the organization's operations, it may not be worth the risk, depending on your tax exempt status or the primary aims of your mission. So lobbying and advocacy obviously are both great strategies. to help further a nonprofit's organization's goals. But if there's some risk that the advocacy is going to cross the line or exceed legal limits, it could lead to a loss of tax exempt status, and that can cause significant issues for your organization, including loss of donor funding needed to keep your doors open. So make sure the staff and volunteers remain in compliance with all federal, state, and tax regulations moving forward. And then just lastly, I'll mention Section 527s, which are U.S. tax exempt organizations created primarily to influence the selection, nomination, election, appointment, or defeat of candidates to federal, state, or local public office. And the term is usually applied only to organizations that are not regulated under state or federal campaign finance laws because they do not expressly advocate for the election or defeat of a candidate or party. There are no upper limits on contributions to 527s and no restrictions on who can contribute. There are no spending limits on these organizations. They have to register with the IRS, publicly disclose their donors, and file periodic reports of contributions and expenditures. And because they cannot expressly advocate for specific candidates or coordinate with any candidate's campaign, many 527s are used to spend money, are used to raise money to spend on issue advocacy and voter mobilization. That's all I'm going to say on 527s. If you want more information, call your attorney. Okay, let's move on from nonprofits to another form of advocacy, which is social media. It's a great place to get a movement going, promote a petition, events, projects, initiatives. Nielsen, the research house, reports that 92% of consumers believe suggestions from friends and family way more than advertising, a trend that we have all seen in leaps and bounds and is likely to grow. So social media advocacy, quite honestly, is defined as leveraging your relationship or your group's connections with people within your network and the networks that are connected to yours through social media so they can help you by sharing their enthusiasm for your cause, your mission, your goal. So I don't know if you can see this. The letters are kind of small. Sorry about that. I'll read through what the various pieces are to have effective social media. Obviously, first and foremost, you want to create content that resonates, that you can see if it's resonating through available metrics, what people like, what they're sharing, what they're totally ignoring. You want to give your network partners a story to tell and help them tell it through clear narratives, good photographs and graphics, or impactful video. You want to be sure to nurture the relationships you have with your advocacy amplifiers and show your appreciation for them. Identify who's sharing your content and thank them, or tag them when they've shared content or participated in whatever your group is working on. This group knows you can create a Facebook group to create a sense of community and place and purpose. Share stories on Instagram to create meaningful moments that support your position. And then, of course, use live video to create a more nuanced and participatory glimpse into what you're working on. I urge everyone to be mindful of the platform. Have somebody who knows what they're doing. Be responsible and recognize that video has greater reach than photos, which have greater reach than just words. And obviously you want to make sure you're using keywords effectively to amplify the message. And also be aware of your timing. Metrics can tell you when your audience is most likely to be reached. Build off of your successes. ICYMI, in case you missed it, is an important tool. You can repeat things at various times of the day and the week to increase your reach. So that's my quick and dirty on social media. Another way to advocate is through community organizing. And anyone in this group who's joined this group or individual or has been part of a political organization, has volunteered on a campaign, you've been a community organizer. And again, historically, women have been more likely to get involved in political leadership first through community organizing, mainly because historically they were formally and informally excluded from other forms of electoral activities. But community organizing can be defined as coordinated efforts carried out by local residents to promote the interests of their community. And it involves relationship building among like-minded activists, education, again, specific to the cause, leadership training, mobilizing voters, recruiting candidates, negotiating with public officials, nonviolent disruptions, boycotts, strikes, mass lobbying, other efforts to achieve a community's policy goal, and voting. Boy, does that sound familiar? Sure it does. So returning to our definition at the beginning of this talk, and I can leave this up for another minute and then I'll stop the share because you've been watching my bobbing head for a half an hour. Returning to our definition at the beginning of this talk, turning passion into action, getting people to care about your position and take action. These are obviously advocacy. I'll stop the share and maybe here, Ed, we can do that. Okay. And if you think about our discussion at the beginning, turning that passion into action, getting people to care about your position and take action, these are all opportunities to move things forward in our world. When we talk about the nonviolent direct action piece of the conversation, community organizing is really just another form of those 6 steps to effective advocacy. Number 1, investigate. And what's interesting, Diane Nash was the one who shared this thought with me. She said, oppression requires the participation of the oppressed. I'm not sure what I think of that, but that's out there as a point from a very well-recognized civil rights activist. So we need to investigate, we need to set an objective, teach everybody what we've learned during our investigation, negotiate, again, confront your opponent, demonstrate, marches, show up at a meeting, call people out in public, resistance, continue the pressure, communicate with more people, and take measures to ensure that the problem doesn't reoccur. Call the press, demand cameras and meetings, do your research, gather data, and don't accept bad behavior. So I can say to this group with full understanding that advocacy, of course, is a calling. Public service is a calling. How you choose to use your anger, your concern, your frustration, your bending of the arc towards justice, you will express what's in your heart to create an impact, whether it's small, whether it's large, but you'll have that impact. So my sense is you all know this. And so whatever form it takes, whether it's by running for office, helping others run for office, standing up for what you believe in, creating an organization to help heal the world, this is the core of who each of us is. And especially now, there's no thought of failure. There's no option of fatigue. We just need to get up every day and we need to keep going. And thank you for listening to my talk on advocacy.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you for your enthusiasm, your energy on this issue. I'm like motivated. And now we're gonna open up to Q&A. There's several people at this meeting. So if you have questions, please add them to the chat right now, or raise your hand. I see it's like 2 screens now of people. So we'll try to see you if you raise your hand, but in the meantime, please do add some of your questions to chat.
Let's start with the issues that people shared at the beginning. And thank you for taking the time to share your issues: LGBTQIA, militarization of society, environment and equality, voting rights, women's access to healthcare, including abortion, making aid and dying available in Illinois, universal franchise, everyone can vote, healthcare, abortion, aid and dying, income inequity and workers' rights, reproductive rights. I want the ERA and the US Constitution. I want to effectively canvass. I continue to care about guns, but right now I want the guns gone. And now guns are important, but most important are my rights in controlling my physical life regarding abortion is a personal decision. And thank you, Allie, for your comments. Churches need to be tax exempt. Okay. So I just wanted to share all of that as we get ready for our discussion. Thank you for sharing what's on your mind. Anna has her hand up.
Hi, thank you for everything that you've spoken about tonight. My question is, I should have put a question mark in there. One of the things that I find is a frustration, and I totally lean toward your conversation about trying to work with the other side. I know that as a Catholic, I'm not going to change my religion, nor am I going to give it up. But I know that our parish in the bulletin promotes postcards, promotes the anti-abortion promotes at what point is that, you can call it lobbying, you can call it advocacy, you can call it whatever, but at some point it feels like what they're doing isn't any different than what I'm doing, and I don't get to be tax exempt.
Right.
So is there a position, is there a point? And like I said, I'm not going to change my position on my faith, but I would like to be able to take a ding at some of our local parishes.
Have you talked to the clergy? Have you talked to the lay people? Have you discussed this with other members of the church, who I bet there's more than just you who's not happy with?
I have many friends. We're trying to get the Catholics for Choice signs that you see them taken, and you can't find those. I had a name for somebody who was supposed to get them to us, but so I'm not sure where it falls, Nancy, but when you're looking for women's reproductive rights, even the right to choose your own passing, it is constantly in conflict with faith issues, constantly. So sitting in my chair, I feel like I need to approach this from a faith perspective in part. So I am a member of Catholics for Choice. I did start the McHenry County chapter because I just could. This county has, when they put together their Daily Herald, they have pages in the centerfold of churches supporting pro-life. The list of names it's 4 or 5 pages long. You have to tackle that, and part of me says a little bit to a time. Let's see some handmaids and some people standing behind them that have signs that say Catholics for Choice. The National Council for Jewish Women out of Chicago, they have signs. But I'm frustrated with the church that they get to do this kind of lobbying and still remain tax exempt. And I'd like to know if there's a way to combat that.
Well, again, I'm not going to provide legal advice in the middle of this conversation, but I think it's important to note, and not to get too delving into religiosity today, but I think they would counter that is furthering their mission, that is one of their tenets as a religion. And so as such, it is within their right to share that information. And, whether I agree, whether you agree, that's a conversation, I guess, that you need to be having with the organization within which you're having your religion housed. And, I don't know that I can say much more than that.
That's okay. I appreciate
20% you can do towards your mission, but I suspect that argument has been made and tested numerous times, that this is part of the mission of the Catholic Church.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for coming tonight.
I see that Amy has her hand up.
I do. And Anna, I'm going to want to talk to you because I've been wanting to hook up with Catholics for Choice around end of life and medical aid and dying. Because as you know, it's not just abortion, but it's also medical aid and dying. And, really the church has been very much in opposition of medical aid and dying, calling it suicide. So I'd love to talk to you about that. But on another topic, one question I have for you, Nancy, and I struggle with this as an activist because I love my job and I want to keep doing it. I work at a 501c3, obviously. We have a C4 as well, but I work on the C3 generally. And, you cannot do political work with that. So as an individual, I also really support medical aid and dying. I support a lot of things, but I support medical aid and dying. And the sense I've gotten, the direction I've gotten is you can't really talk about your work if you go to a political event, because that could put the organization at risk. And I just wondered if you've ever, dealt with that. If I say I'm Amy Sherman and I work at, does that cross the line? And I'm there paying out of my own pocket to be there, et cetera.
Right. I hadn't heard that. I heard the reverse. that the political cannot be part of your time, your use of resources at a 501c3. But in the reverse, I hadn't heard that that was an issue, and I'm not sure where that advice has come from. Think about it in a different realm, and maybe to choose Anna's point, if I'm a priest and I've gone somewhere, I can certainly talk about the fact that I'm a priest at a political thing, and not, I don't know that it's going to splash back unless you're bringing the political into what he's doing, or she, I guess it's just a he at this point, what he's doing, in terms of his being a religious leader. I hadn't heard that it went in both directions.
I feel like it's like a nuanced thing, and I need more.
I would call a lawyer maybe if it's getting in the way of your life, but it's about resources that are tax exempt being used for charitable, educational, medical, scientific purposes. But in the reverse, I'm not sure that there's that nexus.
Okay, thank you.
Jane.
I saw this advertised and I'm on there, but I don't know as an organization who has put this together, and I'd be very curious about that. So that would be my first question.
This conversation?
Well, somebody is sponsoring this particular, what am I trying to say? Talk, with organizing it, bringing us together and advertising it. And I'm just curious if there's an organization in particular that has done this. So,
I mean, are you talking about our meeting today? Who organized this? Oh, so we're a national organization of women chapter. And there are several now chapters in Illinois. We're the North and Northwest Suburban Chicago chapter.
Of now,
yes.
Oh, thank you. That's what I was looking for. I hadn't heard that on it. And yes, I am a member. I didn't know that. But again, and listening to the last question, there's something on it. I'm also an active member of the League of Women Voters. And we have just struggled through a 50C3, whatever you call it, and 4 at the last convention on it. And I probably shouldn't even be talking about it. And a number of us opposed giving up the C4 because we believe one of our functions is to actually go out there and advocate for many things. So I was very interested in what you talked about on that particular thing. And again, thank you very much. We actually won, and we're still a combination C3, C4, which I think is important because all of us, whether you're in an organization or you're independent on it, and we have a responsibility. If we don't like what's going on, and right now I am not a real happy camper with what's going on in this country. And we have got to work hard to get something done, whether it's with us now, or it's with the league, or it's with any other organization that wants to see this country go back to what it should be, because we are not there. We are so far away from it right now in what's going on. It just terrifies me. And it's sometimes I say, I'm glad I'm old. I'm going to be dead in a few years because I'm old, okay? And I'm not going to have to deal with it, but my children are.
Right.
And we have to be active on that. We have to do this and fix it. And I'm not sure I know how. That's my lecture.
Well, thank you, Jane. Thank you. And I think, by raising the issues and taking the time to educate other folks, and hopefully, if they're young, if they have time, if they're passionate, whatever the case may be, then you're passing the baton. We always hear about how we're standing on the shoulders of giants. So those who came before us were fighting the hard fights, and we're fighting impossible fights at the time, but we're able to persevere and able to bring about change. And so now we're maybe the giants with the shoulders that others need to be standing on, and taking the time and teaching them how to be effective, how to be more than 30-second activists. That's my big beef. And that's why I appreciated the time to talk with all of you tonight, is so many folks are like, well, I marched. Okay. And what did you achieve? Or I got so mad, I retweeted this horrible thing that, so you just amplified the bad, whatever. So let's take that time. And thank you for what you're doing, both with NOW and with the League of Women Voters. And that's a huge service, because so many folks depend on these organizations to get the information about the folks who've tossed their hats into the ring. So thank you. Don't give it up.
I appreciate and the guts you had to eliminate guns. And nobody else did it on the North Shore. Drives me crazy, but
well, it was one of those things where in the wake of Sandy Hook, it was one of those moments where you kind of stop as a human being and you go, something happened. And, people were afraid we were going to get sued. And we don't have a ton of money for a lawsuit against the NRA. And what do you know? They did sue us. So we called Senator Durbin's office, and they said to us, we can put you in touch with the Brady Center. They'll provide you with free legal services. And then we were off to court. So it worked, but it was a moment of courage. And I know everybody on this call has had those moments where you have put your foot out, raised your hand, whatever, pick your metaphor, and done what's difficult because you felt the need to be the change. So I want to thank you all for what I know you've already done, and you've put a lot into the chat, and we could probably talk for days about the things that matter to this group. So thank you. Hi, Terry Cosgrove. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, Nancy. Great to hear all your thoughts today. I was going to be quiet, but when the subject of the Catholic Church was raised, I cannot sit quietly anymore. In addition to putting the postcards and the bulletins and everything, I think it's important for people to know that they supply the backbone and the financing of the anti-choice movement in the United States and in the Illinois Capitol. As a lobbyist and someone who has spent 32 years trying to advance reproductive rights in the state of Illinois, I can tell you there's a phalanx of lobbyists that are paid for by the Catholic Church that are in the Capitol every single day pushing their misogynist, anti-LGBTQ agenda. And it is really, I'm trying to be as gentle as possible here, which is not my nature. But since Nancy called for civility, I'll try. But it really is evil. They are on every issue that we care about, whether it's dignity in dying, whether it's reproductive rights, whether it's LGBTQ rights. They are there opposing and terrorizing legislators. I cannot tell you. In fact, when we did the P&A repeal, I absolutely insisted that it had to be done on 2 days in a row, like the Senate and the House, that we couldn't separate it by a Sunday, because I knew if we passed it in the Senate and then waited until the following week to do it in the House, that every single church in the state would ignite their congregations to call state reps and try to defeat P&A, try to defeat the RHA, try to defeat HB 40. So it's not this, nice, just religious belief and whatever you think it is. It is a very powerful right-wing religious force in this country and in the state of Illinois. So I just wanted to add that into the discussion. And I say all of this as a ex-Catholic, but also a member of Catholics for Choice. So I have like one foot out and the other in. In fact, several years ago, Purcell PAC honored John O'Brien, who's the president of Catholics for Choice, who actually led the referendum in Ireland to legalize abortion. So I just had to throw my 2 cents in. I was going to be quiet and just listen, but
thank you. Thank you. I'll just share, as a judicial candidate, I can't be talking specifically to issues under the Judicial Code of Conduct. So anybody who knows me on this call knows that I am absolutely a far more subdued version of myself. But I can also share that until I was a candidate, I was on the board of Planned Parenthood of Illinois. So I will leave it at that.
Okay, Libby was asking if maybe you'd be able to share your presentation with us.
Oh, sure.
I mean,
Absolutely.
you could,
I'll-
yeah, email it to me.
Sure.
You know, I can pass it around. And do we have any more comments or questions? I don't see any hands, any comments or questions. We're kind of running out of time anyway. I just had one question for you before we close. A lot of, you started your presentation with the word anger and, asking how many people have done rants on social media and things like that. I feel like, to me, sometimes controlling my anger is really difficult. And I know that yelling and screaming, especially at the TV, isn't going to get me anywhere. So, I was really impressed with your poise and how you seem to be handling things. I'm just wondering if you have any tips on how to
Keep breathing. I raised 4 teenage boys, and maybe it was surviving that has me like a much calmer human than I was when I started this whole biz. But no, it's keeping an eye on the ball and recognizing that if you boil it down, everybody wants to be safe. They want their children to be healthy and happy. They want to get a good education for the people in their, whatever it is. Pick the stuff that makes things great, that you're looking forward to celebrating during Thanksgiving, whatever it is, and move forward through with that sense of we all share that, and maybe it's around the fringes that we're disagreeing, because I'll be honest with you, and maybe the other piece, Iris, is turn off your TV. But, if you watch an endless, and I noticed this, and again, before the election, I was a nonstop consumer of 24-hour cable, Twitter, this, that, and the other thing. I was the oldest millennial on the Biden Digital Coalition, whatever. I was very involved. And then peace returned and I stopped watching. And I realized when I turned it on again, it was so frenetic and it's demanding your attention and your response, and it's visceral. It really becomes a lot. If you lay out your plan, and Anna, I understand the pain that you're experiencing. And when you're looking for your place of solace and reflection and they're pissing you off, it's really not fair. And that's what it kind of comes down to. And so it's a matter of figuring out, all right, if this is my priority and I want this, and how can I get to this? And if it's not working there, maybe there is a different place. And I'm married to a Catholic. Maybe there's a different place for that solace and reflection that will give you the peace and the sense of belonging, and not the need for the conflict all the time. If it's within, if it's in a different house of worship, whatever the case may be. And that's me now getting all religious on you. But in any case, I think it's the boys. I think it's manning. And I'll tell you, when we banned assault weapons, we had a lot of protesters in City Hall. It was one of the most tense meetings I've ever run. I literally said to them, I don't put up with this in my kitchen. I am not putting up with this in my chamber. You wait your turn. You speak when it's your turn. You respect the other people in this room. I think that's it. So we can thank the boys, thank my sons.
Okay, I think that's a good note to end. I want to thank you so much, Nancy, for your time.
Thank you all for coming tonight. It's been a pleasure.
Really appreciated it. I want to thank all the participants who joined us. And also I'd like to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving and the other holidays that are following close behind.
Right.
With that, I'd just like to say good night and good luck to everyone. And we'll be in touch.
Thanks, everybody.
When our towns were in flame and yet we got the blame, I wasn't surprised. When police stormed the streets and no one came to our needs, I wasn't surprised. Well, it wasn't our last, and it wasn't our first. My people are killed even right in our church. And maybe I'm wise from too many cries, but I wasn't surprised. When they shot Fred and Mark as they slept in the dark, I wasn't surprised. When the commission contends it was in self-defense, I wasn't surprised. Well, it wasn't our last, and it wasn't our first. My people are killed in their sleep in the church. And maybe I'm wise from too many cries, but I wasn't surprised. In a southern jail cell, a guard gave a girl hell, and I wasn't surprised. She fought back and defied, became an outlaw statewide, and I wasn't surprised. Well, it wasn't our last, and it wasn't our first. My people are killed in the prisons and church. And maybe I'm wise from too many cries, but I wasn't surprised. Well, right down the block, a young boy picked a lock, and I wasn't surprised. Well, the man shot him dead. He was hungry, how he bled. I wasn't surprised. Well, it wasn't our last, and it wasn't our first. My people are killed down the block in the church. And maybe I'm wise from hearing his cries, but I wasn't surprised. Son, nothing wrong had he done. I wasn't surprised. He was walking to class across the Jackson State grass, and I wasn't surprised. Well, it wasn't our first, and it wasn't our last. My family is killed even crossing the grass. And maybe I'm wise from hearing his cries, but I wasn't surprised. I see your children fall, and I grieve for you all, but I wasn't surprised. I have known all along that they're mean and they're strong, so don't be surprised. Well, it wasn't your last, it was only your first. The day will come around that they'll kill you in church. And maybe I'm wise from too many lies, but I wasn't surprised. Well, I'm bitter as hell, but one thing I'll tell you, you might be surprised. If we stand side by side to stop this genocide, they will be surprised.